Federal government sticking by immigration plan despite housing supply concerns. This is the Great White North Report. Alright, so despite many warnings that the immigration strategy of the Liberal government couldn't widen housing shortfall by 1 million units in 2 years, is going on deaf ears. The Liberals are still planning to bring in 500,000 new immigrants per year for the next 3 years, till 2025. So that's going to be 1.5 million new immigrants in the next 3 years. The question is, where are we going to house these people? Already we're in a housing crisis. There's not enough rental units. There's not enough houses being built, even though in my area they're building houses at a record pace. More and more farmlands being ripped up for housing. And that's the problem. When you bring in that many people and you need that many houses, you're not doing the environment any help, any favors. Because we're ripping up farmland, we're destroying woodlands, we're putting pressure on the ecosystems. The price of food is going to go up eventually because less and less farmland means that the existing farmland has to produce just as much food, if not more, to meet demand, which means we're going to have to start importing more and more food. It's a vicious cycle, but it's truth. So academics, commercial banks, and policy thinkers have been warning the federal government that the pace of population growth facilitated by immigration is making the housing crisis worse. Because when you bring in when new immigrants arrive in Canada, they got to be housed somewhere. They get first dibs on any cheap housing. We can't just leave them stranded at the airport or in shelters and asylum homes. They got to go somewhere. There are federal plans to house them. They find a house as quickly as possible. And what it does is it forces a lot of native Canadian-born people out, which is why you see a lot of new people down in my area. A lot of people in Toronto are selling their homes and moving down here where it's cheaper. A lot of homes are being converted into apartments, which means you have overcrowding in certain apartments, in certain houses. Now, the age-old question has been aging population restraining public finances as healthcare needs rise and the tax base shrinks. Because Canada is having like 1.4 children per woman. I don't know, I had 4 children, so I'm already over that record. Most people still have only 2 kids. But in my area, I don't think it counts because we have a lot of Amish and Mennonites here in my area. So they generally tend to be big families. So you got to wonder where they're getting these numbers from. So the idea they had was a ramped up skill-based immigration offering a solution. Government policies delivered, but now the question is whether the swing in population has gone too far too fast. The problem is when you bring in new immigrants, it does strain our public finances and healthcare anyway. Automatically they get free healthcare when you immigrate as a permanent resident. You get all sorts of perks, like freebies, for the first year or two when you arrive. I know because my wife was an immigrant. Though when we got married, we lived 5 years in a third country before I decided to come back to Canada. And she came with me as a permanent resident. We had to apply, go through all the hoops like anyone else. I know she got pretty good GST, HST tax rebates. We got child tax because my oldest son was born overseas. And when we came home, she got a ton of money for that. When you have kids, you get pretty good money for the first 5 years or so. Federal government hands out a lot. Healthcare, same thing. So it does put a drain when having new immigrants because they usually operate within the lower tax bracket at first, which means they don't pay a lot of taxes at first. And that puts a strain. Also, there's that fallacy that they're all young people coming here to Canada. No. A friend of my wife's, she's an immigrant herself, but she's been in Canada for a long time. She was forced to marry someone from the old country. In arranged marriage. And then when that guy came, he went and brought his parents over here who don't work. These parents now have to live with them, which works out great for the housing crisis, but not for the healthcare, the strain on our healthcare system. Because now these 2 elderly people who don't work, never contributed a dime to the Canadian tax base, now get the automatic pension plus GST rebates and free healthcare. So another thing that exasperates the housing crisis is the international students. Now, they say temporary foreign workers too in this article, but that's not totally true, because in my area, a lot of temporary foreign workers work on farms. They work on the farms and they get housed on the farm. There's dormitories. I see it all the time. When I was a kid working in the tobacco fields, the next farm over to us had Jamaicans. They were in a bunkhouse. The same thing goes with the fruit areas. They have bunkhouses there. You see busloads of Mexicans or Latinos coming up to the local Walmart, or the Jamaicans come up on a bus or a van. They go on shopping sprees at Walmart, Canadian Superstore, wherever they happen to be. So they're housed on the farms. They're not housed in any apartment complexes. The international students, on the other hand, are housed in housing, student housing. So 1 room, 2 room, a lot of them housed together, cram as many as you can in a room. But it does create other issues. Now, the problem with the shortage of housing means that the price of housing has gone through the roof. The average is $600,000 nationwide, I believe, for a house. This area, the average is around $475,000, and that's just for a 3-bedroom house. Nothing special. Might have a nice yard, a little rundown, but that's it. Now, Chrystia Freeland, in order to combat the rising cost, has a home savings account as part of housing crisis solution. It's not a magic bullet. So what you do is put $8,000 per year for a total of $40,000. So that's a 5-year thing, tax free. How many kids coming out of university or college or high school have $8,000 to save per year? A lot of these kids today don't want to work that hard. I see a lot of kids who are space cadets, need a good swift kick. Mine, oldest is not that. But even he has a hard time saving $8,000 a year. And he works a full-time job plus a part-time job. And go to school. But it's a start. $40,000. 5 years ago, that would be good for 10% down. The other problem with the housing crisis, there's so much competition that you usually have to overbid. When you bid on a house, you just have to go over. It's called a bully offer. And there were too many times where I would bid on a house, the asking price, or a little over, and I wouldn't get it because somebody offered more. Finally, to get my house, I had to offer $15,000 more over the asking. And that just got me this house. But a savings account is good, but again, kids these days don't have to learn how to save money. And most of them have never handled money. So the idea is good and bad. Does it help the housing crisis? No. Does it help the cost for young people to try and get a house? Yes. So what is one solution for the housing crisis? Well, Ottawa is considering a cap on international students to ease housing pressure. Because apparently we had 800,000 international students last year. Universities and colleges love international students. They pay more in tuition. And these are usually the rich kids from these countries, especially India and China. And their parents can afford it. They bring a lot of money in. Unfortunately, I see a lot of them where I work. They work during the summer. Seasonals. So they're thinking of capping international students, which the universities won't like because that's their cash cow. But these 800,000 international students, they take up housing. Usually the cheapest housing. Canadian students can't afford anything. Most Canadian students these days don't go far from home. Most of them, the majority of them, live at home and go to school locally or commute if it's not too far. I don't think most of them don't go as far as they used to. So they're trying to force universities not to accept so many international students. That's a government thing too, because the government's the one that issues the visas. And the universities do exploit students for their money, and the universities don't have enough housing themselves, on-campus housing. And on-campus housing should be for Canadian kids. Again, universities should be prioritizing Canadian kids. They should get first dibs on any enrollment. there's still room, then you can bring in the international students. But universities will enroll, says here, 5-6 times as many students as they have spaces for them in the building. Well, that's true, because there's only so much housing you can do. So it says here that they need to build 5.8 million new homes, including 2 million rental units by 2030 in order to tackle housing affordability. Like I said, when you're bringing in that many international students and that much immigration in a short span of time, it's never going to go down. It's definitely not going to go down to what it was in 2015 or 2018. It will peak and it might stabilize, but it's never going to go back down to what it was. Not unless people are willing to move out to the east coast of Newfoundland, which has lots of abandoned buildings. There's your cheap, affordable housing. Though job-wise, you're not going to be able to find much. So there's no magic bullet. I would say limit international students and also limit immigration. Immigration should be capped at around 200,000 per year, and the international students should be capped at around the same. Time for our universities to suck it up. But the one problem is everyone looks to the federal government to solve it. I don't want the federal government to solve it. I want them to solve the immigration problem. They can do their part by limiting things, but at the same time, I don't want them. Big government is never good. He who governs best governs least. I'm all for that. Because Trudeau knows nothing about housing, and neither does anyone in his cabinet. So asking him to fix a housing crisis is absurd. If I want to fix the housing crisis, I look to builders. The guy's actually building the homes. Hey, Canadians, let me know what you guys think of the housing crisis. I know it's a big issue. And should the federal government stick to its immigration plan, or should we reduce numbers? Leave comments in the comment section. Until next time, this has been the Great White North Report. I'm in love with